very excited to have this panel here. Data sharing is something that all of us on the stage are incredibly passionate about, and I know it is something that the whole community is talking about all the time, so I'm excited to be speaking here. We'll get on with the panel with a round of introductions. I'll go first. I'm Sanath, Ramesh. I'm a father of a 5-year-old boy with an ultra-rare disease. He's one of 10 kids in the world with this condition. Global Genes is very special for me because 4 years ago, about a month after his diagnosis, I stepped into this conference, which got me into the entire rare disease space. So that's where I started my first podcast called Raising Rare. That's where we started a nonprofit after that to raise some funds and do drug repurposing for my son. And now I started focusing a lot more on data sharing with my company, CuresDev. Nasha, do you want to introduce?
Thank you. And I want to say that I absolutely love your podcast. Thank you.
Thank you.
So our stories are a little similar. I have a daughter, Amara, with FOXG1 syndrome, and she was diagnosed 6 years ago. And actually, they must have gotten diagnosed around the same time, because a month after her diagnosis, I came to Global Genes for the first time. And it was probably the most helpful thing that happened to me to start my journey. I also started a foundation, the FOXG1 Research Foundation, with a group of other parents. And then during that journey, my background, my previous life was all tech and data. And I was looking into how do we collect clinical data for natural history studies. And I felt that the current in-person model was very antiquated for a variety of reasons. And we had to do something different. So I joined a company called Ciitizen, which at that time was focused in oncology, and convinced them to build out a rare neurology platform. And the rest is kind of history. We're well on our way now, and really making a big impact in shortening the drug development cycle through innovative data models, which is what I'm really passionate about.
Hi, I'm Vanessa Vogel-Farley. I am the research, it's a long title, Senior Director of Research, Data Governance, and Data Analytics for Global Genes. I also serve as the Principal Investigator of the RARE Data Platform, which some of you might be hearing about a little bit here. My background is actually in neuroscience. I've been a neuroscientist since a long time ago, but when it comes to data governance, a lot of it comes from, I have written myself into corners when it comes to data sharing. I've written my fair share of IRBs, a fair share of consents. I've been part of longitudinal data collection efforts where the data was siloed. I created my own silos. And when I came over to RareX, it was one of those things where I was like, we can't do that anymore. So I really have been banging the gong in terms of like making sure that we're breaking down those silos, making sure we're connecting data where we can, and then making sure that we're crafting new strategies that we don't create the silos that we have in the past.
Hey, so I'm Betourne. I'm Executive Director for the RDC ADAP. The long name is a mouthful. It's the Rare Disease Cures Accelerator Data and Analytics Platform. It's a program entirely funded by FDA, ran out of the Critical Path Institute, so Critical Path is a nonprofit. The idea of the program and platform is to maximize the use and utility of rare disease data. So we created a platform where we aggregate rare disease data. We also provide an interface for people to access and analyze the data online. So these are the big lines of the program, and as you can expect, data sharing is really a part of my day-to-day. It's been 2.5 years discussing with the entire ecosystem, industry, and foundations, and so I think I really turned de facto into a data sharing advocate. I'm really fierce about the need to share rare disease data and find ways to break these silos that Vanessa just mentioned.
Thanks, everyone. I want to set the stage for this conversation a little bit more by stating the obvious, which is in the rare disease biotech world, data is like oil or gold or whatever you want to call it. I didn't realize this for several years, but all of the output of my money that I'd invested in my scientific research and development was all data. I had funded a mouse model development, and they sent me an Excel sheet. I had funded a high-throughput drug screen, and they sent me an Excel sheet. We talk about clinical data. It's another Excel sheet, right? It's powerful how much to know that how much of all of our output of our funding is data, and so it is only important that we shift our focus a little bit more towards data in crafting a data strategy at the first place. And I know the title of the talk is focused on crafting a data sharing strategy. I am going to pivot that a little bit more to starting with crafting a data strategy. I'm also going to argue that if you are running a patient foundation, you should have someone that is just like a chief research officer, a chief data officer, even part-time, that understands and thinks and breathes data every day. So part of this panel and the conversation, we will still highlight a lot about sharing, but I will also focus a lot about the larger data strategy. And so I want to talk from the data strategy point of view first, and then go into the other aspects. So what does data strategy mean to you all? From your experience, how did you go about crafting one?
That's a great question. So this will be a little bit of a repeat if anyone was in my panel yesterday, but I thought about, for FoxG1, a data strategy quite intensely. And so we looked at the different types of places that we were getting data. Like you said, animal models were one. So we had looked at all the mutations that our patient population had, and we grouped those mutations into 8 different categories. So like early frame shift, later frame shifts, missense, et cetera. And then we created a mouse model for each of those mutations, those groupings. Then we did the same for cell lines that we derived from patients' skin samples. And then we had our patient registry, and then we had a natural history study on Ciitizen. And so obviously, like you said, all of this is coming back. I'm not getting mice back, I'm getting data back. And so a big part was the linkage and linking all these different platforms. And so that was the first thing that we thought about before signing any agreements, that we are able to link. It's really hard to think about that after the fact. You got to think about that before, and make sure that you're working with platforms that allow, linkages. For example, RareX and Ciitizen, you can link both data sets through unique identifiers. So things like that are really critical, so you can have a longitudinal history. So we really thought about that carefully. And then we thought about, okay, how are we going to input all of this data? But also, how do we make sure in our sponsored research agreements that we have clauses that state we have access, that we will get all of the raw data. If you don't state that, it's going to be really hard to then go, because no one's going to give it to you, to then get that out of your researchers. So you have to think, backwards of like, what will it take? And so then getting actually access to that data. And then it's a ton of stuff, and like it's rows and columns, et cetera. Where are you going to put it? Where are you going to house it? Is it AWS? Is it Google Cloud? Who is going to manage it? And then how are you going to create a way to actually then analyze that data and make it then available? What are the, if it's patient data, you have to have the correct IRB, you have to make sure it's de-identified. So there's a lot of different steps that you do have to think about and go through and really think about it like a strategy, because the end goal, there's no point in funding anything if you are not going to get that data, if you can't connect it to other data sets and then make it useful and accessible for researchers, pharma, other people to actually access and do something with that data. That's how we thought about it.
I wear a couple hats. So I was a patient advocacy leader for about 7 years for the Do 15Q Alliance. I'll talk about the way that we crafted our data strategy for the Alliance, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the RareX side. So when we were at the Alliance, when I came into the space, it was all parent run. A lot of you guys are parents or patients themselves who are running your own organization. However, what Nasha just said, you're like, where would I put that? I don't know how do I get an AWS cloud? Where would I put this sort of thing? So kind of taking a step back is basically doing a landscape. Where does data exist for your organization? Where does data exist for your patients? And then what's the purpose of that data? Is it something that is beneficial to link in there? Is it not beneficial to link in there? And really kind of engaging we basically did a whole landscape and then just tracked, okay, we've got brain tissue here, and we've got registry data here, and we've got clinical data here, just to make sure that when we had researchers come to us, we could say, we have our brain bank here, we have some data assignments, and here's how we can put it together. It was more of a relationship building for that data strategy, because we knew internally we didn't have the resources nor the expertise to maintain that data internally. So you can go one step further, because FoxG1 has that, but when I was at the Alliance, we didn't. So we just made sure that we had the data relationships happening there. Now, from the RAREX side, we actually support that data linkage that Nasha was talking about, where we look at the data that's out there, do that landscape, and say, okay, where can we use this most effectively? Where can we federate it? Where can we link it? Where can we link it based upon the protocol and the consents? And then how can we share that too? So those sorts of things, every data set that comes to RAREX or comes into the space is that, okay, we collect our data, but then we have our partners in biopharm to say, oh, we've got this clinical trial that is now, has sunsetted, we've got data for you, how are we going to use it, how do we ingest it, and then how are we going to share it? So it's a lot of things like you want to ask all those questions along the way before you actually start moving the data too, because you want it to make sure that you're meeting a goal. Because it takes a lot of time and effort, in terms of these linkages, so that if you're doing it, you want to make sure that somebody's going to want it on the backside. So we ingest a lot of samples, we ingest a lot of data, we ingest a lot of other people's data to make sure that there's always a goal to make that it's going to be shared on the other end and used. So that's kind of how we've done both of our strategies, making sure that landscape's out there and that you have your ultimate goal in mind. Also being flexible. Because you don't know what you don't know until it's sitting in front of you. You're like, oh, this is going to take forever to remap. So making sure that you're bringing in the experts in that space, making sure you're really going back to the source of it and saying, what was the intention and what can I use it for now?
Great. What do I say after all of that? I don't know. Maybe I'll be more superficial. We don't collect data ourselves, so really we're the recipient of people that contribute data for us for the greater of good. So, I'm talking with a lot of communities that are starting. So I always, come down to a few things that I feel are really critical. Thinking about past data collected and future data to be collected, really telling the foundations, I think, if it's not happening right now in your community, you need to engage that discussion. And if you want to be the lead to that, please be that lead to tell your community this needs to happen. You need to put the data at the same place as much as possible. Try to engage with all the people that collected data in the past, and then think about future collection and where you want to put the data with all the consideration that you guys mentioned. Obviously, that's to me critical. Thinking about the de-identification so that you can really make sure you can think that ahead of time to prospectively potentially link data collections together. Really important. If you're setting up a registry, you may want to, or you're building a natural history study, you want to make sure you could link that to future clinical trials. So that's really critical to me. One thing too is when you select a partner, so we have a platform, but I'm always having the same message, like I believe in our platform and our effort. We do not own the data, so when you share data to us, you can share to others. And I'm pushing people to share data more broadly and to share to multiple platforms for greater visibility. So one key thing that I always say is like, select what's best for your community. Make sure you don't trap your data. Make sure you don't select a partner where getting the data out is going to be really complicated. And I have a few examples in mind that I won't name.
Alex, actually, that is such a good point because you're right. The idea is that you want to take your data and then as all these new awesome platforms come out like CPath that have like cool analytics tools, you want to be able to just take your data and plop it on that platform so you could utilize those tools or researchers could utilize those tools. But if you're not able to do that, if you're in a platform that's like, no, you have to use our tools only and your data's stuck on our platform, then you can't utilize and you have no idea what's coming in the future. So it's such a great point.
As I'm listening to all of this, I'm imagining myself 4 years ago sitting in one of these tables and going, wow, this is a lot. And for folks out there, especially the ones that are starting out, I know you would be investing next 1, 2, 3 years in really learning the science. While science seems hard and you need a PhD for it, data is equally hard. And even though they don't give you a PhD these days for it, it's worth spending the time and understanding what each of these mean, right? And there was a lot that was covered here. Something that I want to touch upon more is how do you engage patients when you craft a data strategy? And this is something that Nasha and Vanessa, you probably have first-hand experience in, and Alex, if you have heard from the community around, I would love to hear all of your thoughts.
Oh, I can start. So we actually have a data strategy that we sharing strategy with patients together. But basically, the RAREX data sharing strategy is also that patients own their data. I think in general, we hear this all the time. Like with GDPR, with HIPAA, you own your data. And that goes from your medical data, it even goes to your research data. You actually, if you're in a compliant space, you should be able to take your research data and give it to somebody else. You should be able to do it. And the RARE you can do that, which is nice. But it's one of those things that we came down to in the consent form. We actually ask patients where they want their data to be shared. And that's the only place that we can. So they're saying, yes, I want to share with something like CPATH for general research. That data can go to CPATH if they ask for it. So making sure that they understand that they are able to share their data that way, and then we respect that wish. The other thing is when their data is shared or requested, we let them know. It's groundbreaking, right? It's totally groundbreaking. So we have these several studies that researchers have requested data, and the best part is we get to go to those patients and say, hey, there's been a research request, they have this deadline, just go into RareX and make sure that these 3 things are filled out, because that's what they want. And the engagement is so amazing on the backside, because you see them log in within 24 hours of me sending that email. And so it's making sure that they know that they are able to share their data where they want it to be. They can also change that over time, and they know when their data, and I also say, and samples, because we do this with biosamples too, making sure that they know where they are. And so that they've been part of that strategy, they've been part of that communication, and they also know when something is published about them, they're gonna get a copy. So the good, I don't know if you guys saw, we had a paper published with the Homocystinuria Foundation, and it came out, and we emailed it within 24 hours to all of the patients who had given data for that paper. So making sure that you are inclusive, and you're also coming back to them saying thank you. We're putting it into action, we're putting it into place. And even when we're linking that, we've got, OSDC was a great example. We're linking with Ciitizen, as we've said we've done, as you said through your data sharing that you want to do that. We've linked with Ciitizen, this is what we're doing, and they get that update too.
Yeah, I 100% agree with everything, and that's, for me, what attracted me to a platform like Ciitizen, because patients own all their raw data. They can download it, they can get off the platform if they want and take their data, they could share it easily. Most platforms out there, patients do not own their own data. In fact, you may be, I don't know if you guys know, but your data gets sold every single day by your healthcare providers and you have no idea. So the way to take patients along is by giving them these benefits and explaining these benefits to them and then choosing. So we chose a RareX to partner with because they have a very similar philosophy of patients in the center. And then the other thing that you touched upon is, for a lot of patients, I always say it's in 80-20s. 20% of your population will be really into research and will get that you want to share data for research, and they'll take that survey and they'll do that, and 80% will not, right? They're just trying to get through their day-to-day. The idea of a cure is so abstract to them. And so finding ways to give things back to them immediately, right? So we've started giving back, okay, these are just a very simple example, these are the top medications that other patients like yours are, or if you're a caregiver, other patients like your child are taking. Here are the most adverse effects. Now you can take that and work with your neurologist. So trying to also think about what can you give back in the interim. And even if you run a foundation, you're going to have to do this for every single thing that you're doing, right? Is how do you give back to your community to take them along the journey with you? Because the treatments they do take time.
Yeah. Again, I don't really engage with patients directly through my activities, but I think some of these points are critical. When you talk about patient owning data, we had the discussion maybe 1 year ago, so I don't know how the numbers changed, but I was asking Vanessa, what is the percent of, because I think there's a checkbox, if that's still the same on RareX, where you allow potentially to share your data or not, and most patients choose to select yes. Patients want to share data, we all know that, for the most part, patients want to share data. But you also need to make sure you protect their identity, you protect, their information, you maintain their ownership, all of that is really important. But you also need to strike a balance to make sure that the data remains useful for science, right? So there's an equilibrium here between really protecting, the patient's wishes, but also maintaining the usefulness of the data. So I think, again, I'll relate to another past conversation I had with Sanath earlier this year, where I was telling him, maybe I think sometimes maybe we're over communicating about how we protect, patients' data. Maybe we are feeding into some fears that maybe are not rational, And patients have different political views, and we all believe some are false, some are correct, and we just want to make sure we protect them. But that speaks to that balance that we need to achieve. And I think when you give back and you provide that clarity on how the data is used, then that's the way, not to feed into these fears, because you're really providing that space and that clarity and transparency on how the data is used. So that's critical to me.
I will echo that. I think that we do have to strike a balance, especially when you're talking about creating a data strategy too, that there is a legal component to this. If you are maintaining and holding data, even if you're a data steward, there's a lot of laws around this. So in terms of de-identification and that sort of thing, we talk about it a lot because it is important, and it actually is probably the biggest lift that we do, right? Data structure is one thing, but when you're talking about the legal implications of GDPR alone, not to mention the states' rights that are coming into it when you're talking about data being collected from people from Washington, people from Colorado, like there's the two most recent changes. Those are big things that when you're a patient advocacy organization, to keep up with those is a lot. And so, but the good part is there's organizations like us that you can ask questions, especially Global Genes. We have people on the staff that you can ask, but then also engaging with a partner in your data areas to make sure that you're able to know, I know that this is being maintained compliantly. I know that this is going to be able to be moved and linked that way, but also just know that when we talk about de-identification and we talk about these things, we know that you guys want to be, you're standing up, you're like, I have a rare disease or my kid has a rare disease, please help them. We know that you're there, which is a good part. But at the end of the day, we also do need to have that balance of like, if I'm sharing the data to CPATH, I'm going to do all that I need to do to de-identify it so that I can compliantly manage it and also give it to Alex so that he knows that he can use it the way he needs to. So it's one of those things that we do have to strike a really nice balance when it comes to these data sharing strategies, because there is a lot of legal implications in the background. And like as yesterday somebody said, you want to avoid wearing orange. Data laws, when they get violated, people go to jail. So it's one of those things that in your data sharing strategy and how you're approaching it, just know that it's not a small lift when you're talking about data sharing in that aspect.
Yeah, no one wants to go to jail.
No one, not over data, no.
So I want to go more targeted here and dive a little bit deeper, and I want to start with Alex. So Alex, you speak with a lot of patient foundations, nonprofits, academia, biotechs, right, and even the government. In your conversations around data sharing, could you maybe draw and share one example of what good looks like, and one example of what bad looks like? Maybe it's not bad, maybe it's not ideal, right? What was a good data sharing? You spoke with someone, you felt like, oh, they had their act together, and I would like to, they have their strategy right for data sharing, and can you talk about what that good looks like?
So
I'm not sure I really get the angle here. Can you just?
I'll rephrase that a little bit.
Yeah.
So when CPATH first launched, what did you learn when CPATH launched?
Yeah.
Like, people are going to share their data with us.
Yeah.
Was that true? And then what did you learn, and what did you change in order to partner with PEGS in order for data to be shared with you?
Okay. Thank you.
Exactly the question. Thank you.
So the rare disease platform at CPATH, the program started in 2019. We launched the platform about 1.5 years ago now. So it's been really a journey while we were building the platform in engaging with the ecosystem and all the stakeholders. Really building our legal agreements, because we have a platform that accepts data that is shared to us. And so we really worked our data contribution agreements that we need to sign and negotiate when someone shares data to us. It was really a journey of multiple discussions and building in flexibility into the agreement to try to maximize data sharing. We also have a data use agreement, so once someone wants to access data on our platform, they need to sign the terms and conditions. So that's another firewall that we built in with a lot of discussions. What do we put on these agreements? The platform and the program is entirely backed by FDA. So, I think maybe a bit naively, some of us thought, okay, this is really going to push industry to share data to a platform. We do have a lot of placebo arms from clinical trials overall at our institute that was shared over the years. So we saw, okay, but it didn't really open the floodgates to data sharing. It's always a conversation. That's, I think, the first lesson learned is that each time you discuss potentially getting someone to share data to a platform like us, it's always a new conversation, and you may face a lot of blocks, and they're not necessarily the same, and some might be shared between different stakeholders. So there is a lot of things that you see rather often from academia, for example. As you can expect, like the major thing is publication, not being scooped, potentially being in contact with the users that request the data. So we built an answer to that people can select. Basically, we can embargo the data and not make it visible for a certain amount of time to protect the publication. In the meantime, that helps us at least give us a little more time to curate and not feel the pressure. We request that each contributor of the data sets are going to be notified, acknowledged on the publications. So that's like a classic block that we see. From industry, sometimes it's consent. And actually, we had a conference last week with a session on consent and data sharing, and we were talking about industry, and waivers of consent, which could be a means for industry to share their data. Sometimes it kind of feels like maybe they're hiding a little behind that consent question. I think there are a lot of data in industry vaults that could be potentially shared. And I had one example that happened to me that I think really speaks to that. We signed the data contribution agreement with one industry, and so the legal took a look at the consent, and then that company got bought up. Right? And so we couldn't get the data transfer. And so the new legal from the new company took over. And the legal said, no, the consent doesn't allow data sharing. I don't know who I believe, but I think that's maybe like a good example of, something gone wrong. On the flip side, a lot of, really examples that are like, wow, that happened, discussing with SAE Pharmaceutical at some point. Within 6 months led to sharing of multiple data sets in Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. That was really easy. Really no legal issues. That was just like the fastest timeline, one of the fastest timelines. I mean, I had faster, but also you have to be aware the timelines can be extremely long. And you have to be resilient. You have to give trust. You have to come back. You have to explain, and things may change on your side. So, for us, it's really for me at least, it's really something that I care a lot about, and I'm very resilient. I know sometimes it's going to take years, but this is the game.
Thank you. Vanessa, I want to talk about the legal aspects of it a little bit more. I know RareX focuses a lot on prospective data collection, right? Like patient-reported data. And that has the flexibility that you don't really need to silo within just the US. You can have patients anywhere, start collecting data there. So could you maybe talk about what challenges you've had to overcome so far to make the patient-reported data available and accessible across the world?
Sure. So obviously data protection changes, and it's going to change weekly, yearly, wherever it is. So we have a very flexible approach to it, because we know that we can capture any patients anywhere in the world. So 39% of the patients who we're collecting data for RareX are not in the US. And so what that ends up doing is we have to look at each individual country's current data laws. Are we complying with them through our processing and our procedures to make sure that we're meeting that gold standard? Right now, thankfully, GDPR kind of has that gold standard, but things are changing. And so we're always looking. So we have a fantastic data privacy officer. I don't know if Barry's in here. But he's my partner in crime when it comes to a lot of this stuff too, to make sure that, hey, we analyze what percentage is in this country. Okay, are we meeting what they need? Brazil just put through a new law. Are we meeting what they need? To make sure that we're approaching this in a flexible, and as I always say, it's a moving target, and we're always just kind of aiming, because it's all that way. The additional piece is that when we talk about data compliance and data sharing, people are like, oh, are you GDPR certified? In data sharing and data privacy, there's no certification. Just so you know, if anybody tells they're certified in data sharing and GDPR, it's not true. There's no certification for it. It's a process, it's a procedure, you're following those compliant aspects. And so they should have a program or something like that. So a lot of it was just the misconceptions around data. So we had a lot of questions coming in that way. A lot of groups that were from different countries to make sure that like, are you meeting that need? What's the compliance look like? How do they get it in different languages and that sort of thing? So it's just making sure that that was one of the big things is like, here's what we need to tell you, here's what we need to educate on. And if something changes, this is why it's changing. Right? Because that's the other thing, educating the people that are participating in it, as well as the organizations who are, entrusting us with their data collection, to make sure that they're understanding the legal aspects to this too. The other thing is that what we stand up is, one of the reasons for RareX is that we don't need PAGs to become legal experts in data sharing. That's the whole thing. Like you guys are trying to, get your proper care, you're trying to, activate your researchers and that sort of thing. We want to take care of some of that for you, right? To make sure that I'll put it this way, not even RareX. Anybody you engage with data sharing, just make sure that they're helping you with that too. Meaning that if they're collecting data for you, that the consent does have external things like future use of the data so you don't have to reconsent and you can share it with people like Alex and myself. But just partnering with people who know that this is a long game aspect. So if you don't come onto RareX, if you're working with another company, that they have a data privacy person, that they know what they're doing in that space and they're able to answer the questions and show you their protocols to make sure that you're partnering properly.
Having started a company in the data privacy space, I can tell you how hard and important that is.
Yeah. One thing, just to comment on the GDPR, because I've faced that. So I learned that GDPR certification didn't mean anything. Although at some point I probably said that in conversations, But we do. The platform is actually physically located in Europe, and that was really to facilitate data sharing with Europe. And so we do follow GDPR rules, and we have a legal agreement with the standard clauses from GDPR. One of the things, so you tell me if you face that too. One of the things that I faced was the interpretation of the GDPR. And so when I'm trying to negotiate a contribution, we do have we have a data protection officer as well, and so we have our interpretation of these laws. But on the opposite side, sometimes the interpretation is different, and so I feel, I'm hoping at some point they're going to make some changes to make it like a little clearer and less prone to interpretation, because that has been an issue. I also discussed, with the UK, and they more or less kind of followed that, but I had an example where they just really decided to run like one step ahead of what we thought was necessary in terms of data de-identification according to the GDPR law, just to speak about the complexity of international data sharing.
And while you spend all the time figuring that out, the privacy landscape changes. New states come up with new laws, and it's a treadmill. I want to go to you, Nasha, and you talked about linking data, right? Like especially in your data strategy as you were building originally, and with Ciitizen too, you have the ability to get the data linked. So could you maybe talk to us about what linking means in a lot of different contexts, and how do you go about achieving that?
Yeah, there's a couple different ways to link, right? So one way you can link, for example, we could link a Ciitizen data set with a claims data set is through a token. And so what a token does is there's companies that create these tokens. They would take a data set, they de-identify it, and they would then connect it to another data set that is also de-identified, and then you've got a token. That's sort of a one-time token, and so a researcher can then use that token to link longitudinally two data sets. So that's one way to do it. The other way to do it is for the two platforms to have either a consent sharing or their own way, like we do with RareX and Ciitizen, where we basically just on a de-identified basis, we both have identifiers, and we're able to share those identifiers with one another. So just to maybe do this more pictorially, if you can imagine a Ciitizen data set, you've got a row with the patient's information, there's going to be a Ciitizen unique identifier. They also have a RareX unique identifier. Therefore, when a researcher wants to, again, longitudinally connect the two records, they can then look at both identifiers. So those are the easy, well, not easy, but two different ways that that you can link. And in the foundation, we thought about that also with our biosamples. So when we worked with our, the lab that hosts all our biorepository, we made sure in our registry that we could link that patient with their sample on the biorepository, for example, and then their data is also linked to Ciitizen, and if they're on RareX, it'll be linked to RareX. So again, it's just about a longitudinal journey Hopefully we'll be able to get some devices in and collect device data, breathing data, et cetera. And again, we want to link that. The whole goal is to get a whole patient, front to end, right? Like head to toe, you want the whole patient. You can only do that if you link all the data sets.
That makes sense. Thank you. I know we are around the 10-minute mark, so I'd like to open up the room for any questions.
So when you do the linking, is that on the family's side? So they have to do that link, or you guys can do that?
Yeah, so exactly. The platforms do the linkage, and that's why, we were discussing that it's so important that you pick a platform that's able to do that linkage. But there are many times as a patient advocacy leader, you have to think about that, right? You have to think about that I'm going to work with this platform, and you may need to push that platform to enable data linkage and do what's necessary. So, but you don't yourself have to do that, and patients, definitely parents, et cetera, don't have to do that.
Cool. And then my second question is, we have a lot of families that, they got diagnosed through the Spark study or some other thing. Do you guys have a way to, for researchers to basically be avoiding counting people twice? Can we link those sort of?
So deduping is a big question, right? CPATH went through this big time because they only get de-identified data sets. So there's deduping is an issue. When it comes to RARE and Ciitizen, we do lean back on Spark and Simons and a couple other ones. What we're doing is we're constantly having conversations with them to make sure that, one, we're crafting data strategies that are looking forward, right? If it's they need to update their protocols, or we need to update our protocols or consents, so that we can make sure we're deduping. The tokenization aspect is another way of doing that, because to create the token, you use identified information to create that token, right, for that person, with some small error usually. But that's one of the reasons that we don't usually lean into unique identifiers created by patients, because there's more error. There's more room for error. So when we're talking about the Simon Simplex, that study and RARE, we can use tokens that are pretty darn close to start deduping. And we use Datavant for the OSTC, which was actually a really, really great partner in that space. But we identified these look like duplicates, and they would spit out this is the percentage that we think are duplicates in this space. We were able to completely match, but these are could be the same person. And so you can see that on the backside, and a lot of the new tokenization programs that are out there are able to do that for you, for groups that are putting them together. But yes, that's a huge problem, especially when we're talking about ends of 10 in the world, and then you get a data set there's 53 people in here, that's actually not true. Can't happen. So, but we think about it a lot, and then on top of it, when there's larger data sets, having conversations with the leaders who are overseeing their data sharing strategy to say, okay, how are we going to do this the best way possible? And it might take years, but most of the time we're going to get there.
I mean, just to say something positive, from conversations that started with some foundation I was talking 1.5 years ago, I see a lot of positive moves, toward this data strategy, and really foundations and registries really thinking prospectively on how to conduct things. I'm really seeing people really engaging in that de-identification selection system, or, selecting your de-identification system, all of that. I think there's really some good movements for that, and it's kind of obvious we haven't mentioned it, but we're talking about losing critical information. And so when Vanessa said, yes, we don't have a de-identification system because we just get data that is shared to us, people ask me a lot, what about duplicates? Duplicates is not really an issue. The real issue is loss of longitudinality, which is critical for many rare diseases because we need to characterize the progression of the disease. And so it's really sad that we're losing that longitudinality. But it's great that people are really making good moves toward avoiding that now. And
we've had a really good relationship with CPATH since the beginning, and almost talking how can we leverage some of what RARE is doing for Federation and being able to tokenize and then feeding it in. Obviously there's just things that we work on together. Right now we're working on a small just pilot project on some of the rare epilepsies, and where we know I know that there's the duplicates in there, I can make sure that they're cleaned, and all those other things that kind of go in those spaces where it's really nerdy work, and nobody ever likes to talk about it, but we sit there and just nerd out about it, and we like it. So.
Yeah, I'm fairly open that I barely understand what we're discussing sometimes with Vanessa. One thing that, for me, I was thinking this morning about the session, and I was thinking, damn, I shouldn't say that. every week, potentially a new silo data, rare disease data silo could be created, and that kind of saddens me. So it's really important, everything that we discussed today, to avoid creating new data silos. As a platform working for the platform, I'm really trying to connect our platform to partners. So one of that is the work we're trying to do we're doing with RareX, and federating to other rare disease data platform or just simply data platform to break these silos between platform. Hopefully, we're never going to get all the rare disease data centralized at the same spot, but hopefully there will be like some really critical platforms that are going to emerge and people are going to embrace them more and more. And we need these platforms to talk together globally.
Thanks for this great panel. And you're not nerds. You guys are really cool. But I wonder, and this is, I feel like it's a constant arm wrestle with our industry partners, and I think possibly we could all have a conversation, but I don't think there's anything proprietary about baseline data. And so I'm wondering if a possible resource to streamline data entry into any platform is to go to our industry partners and say, a failed clinical trial or anything, and say, hey, your baseline data from pre-intervention, can we have those data? Is that something that is on your mind, or is that something that you're already doing, or did I just?
Well, no, it's actually, we are speaking to one partner, and it kind of depends on the disease, but this partner is thinking of a very innovative approach where they want to put all of their clinical trial information into the medical record. So you could put anything in the medical record, right? So they want to actually work with the sites where these trials are going to be happening, and instead of, and they're one way they were looking at this, and maybe this is the way to work with industry, is it's going to save them a ton of costs. They don't have to work with the CRO and build a platform out, et cetera. They're just going to have their nurse practitioners enter information into the medical record. Now that's going to be available for the patient. It's also going to be available to anyone else that wants to access it, right? So it really depends on the risk and what the partner feels. I think that we're going to see more and more of that, especially with ultra rare diseases where there's not a ton of competition. You don't have so many pharma companies looking into one disease. So I actually think we could probably have the most groundbreaking innovation in our space, and then hopefully that'll trickle down, like it always does, right? It'll trickle to larger conditions. So it's exciting.
And we've been ingesting some trial data that has baseline data and trial data into it for clinical trials. And so it's something that leaning into technology too, that when you're working with a partner saying what's the future use case scenario for this baseline data. I also want to say that if you're writing a consent form, whether you be biopharma, whether you be a researcher, whether you be a patient advocacy group, the needs of the consent form are listed on the human subjects protocol, right? Every consent form should also have the future use of data. It should be a required aspect of your consent form. If you are signing a consent form or a clinical trial consent form or whatever, and there's no discussion of what's going to happen with that data after the clinical trial, you should ask. This is something that the discussion needs to be brought out there. You should not be signing a consent form that doesn't talk about what's going to happen to the data after the first intended use. So just in terms of data sharing as a whole, when you're crafting your strategy as a company, when you're crafting your strategy as a researcher or as a patient advocacy group, making sure you're like, what can I do? What do I need to do to make sure that this data is going to be used after I'm done with it? Because that's the only way to fairly collect data from the rare disease space, actually anybody, but that's really one of the big things that you need to do. And if you're signing something that doesn't talk about it, ask the person who's giving you that consent. Why and where is my data going to go afterwards?
Great, thanks.
My name is Aaron Aben, and I represent the Autoimmune Registry. And one of the aspects to sharing data, which I do a lot in other work, is the semantics of the data, the contents of the column that says diagnosis. Is it an ICD code, a SNOMED code? Can any of you address how we can be consistent in the use of the coding so that the data can be shared? Because otherwise it really can't be shared very easily.
Can I add one thing to it? So I think there are a lot of common data models that are being developed, right? As I was looking into the space a little bit more, there are open common data models like OMOP that are very popular, that are widely adopted, but that are not being built by a company, right? It's by the community. And I think I would just love to find more of these that we can all rely on.
Yeah. I mean, you brought up two. I love SNOMED. That's what we use at Ciitizen, and we decided to use it because it's a global terminology system, right? And so, but it does depend on who's extracting the data and how are they classifying it. It's hard to get consistency on that. It's a give and take. I mean, it really depends on the quality of the extractor and how you're doing it, and what that standard is. But I think at least one step forward is to use these common data models, and making sure they're global, especially, and also making sure that they're ones that you can add to. So, like for SNOMED, for example, you can actually, we've added about 3,000 terms now, neurological terms, to the SNOMED global dictionary. It goes through a process, it gets approved. So I think those make a lot of sense. ICD-10 codes, I'm happy to talk about how much I hate them another time. But so I think, but you're always going to have that. But I think it all comes down to if you can connect the data sets, the researcher who's looking at the data set then can also analyze and assess. There's ways to assess how that data has been collected and et cetera. So I think as long as you're using a global standard, you should be okay.